Hi, I'm Will LaVeist. He's Eric ClaVille. You're locked into another LaVeist and ClaVille show where we give it to you straight the way it is from a Black male's perspective. So let's get right to it. We've been covering the Derek Chauvin trial, and this is Justice for George Floyd, Part 3. Prosecution and defense rested their cases. Now the jury will start to deliberate to determine the fate of former Officer Derek Chauvin in the killing of George Floyd. Many are anxious as memories of the Rodney King case and the Trayvon Martin case raise fears of a non-justice verdict. And I know I'm definitely in that camp of concern about a non-justice verdict. Talked about it before on this show, experienced the Rodney King trial, and being convinced, finally, after years of growing up, seeing police brutality, experiencing it myself, growing up as a young man in Brooklyn, New York, and then seeing the videotape and saying, okay, finally, what we've been dealing with all these years, all these generations, the whole world is seeing. And we love to think that the same case is true for what happened with George Floyd. But ClaVille, as an attorney, now last week, the defense did what the defense we expect them to do.
That's
which
right.
is to attack Mr. Floyd's character, which is to say that he was on drugs and say that all of these things that happened to him, it was not about the knee being on his neck for 9.5 minutes, but it was about, exhaust from the car. It was about cardiac arrest, all of these other things. I mean, as a defense, as an attorney, we expected that that's what they would do. And that's pretty much the only call that defense attorneys have in these kinds of cases. The same thing was done with Rodney King. So,
yeah. No, look, Will, you're exactly right. We look at the case, and to us, it's a no-brainer. To the rest of the world, it's a no-brainer. To the people that were there, that saw it, that filmed it, who are still reliving the nightmare of it, it's a no-brainer. To many law enforcement officials across the country, it's a no-brainer.
Right.
But Rodney King, but Trayvon Martin,
right,
and so many others that have gotten to this point so close. But again, reasonable doubt. One person, that's all it takes. One person. And keep in mind that the Supreme Court has just ruled in the 2 states where one juror can still mean a guilty verdict, and that's Louisiana and Oregon. And they're currently looking at retroactivity on that as well. That's an old Jim Crow standard of 3 verdicts. But one person can say, you know what? Maybe that really wasn't the main contributing factor in George Floyd's death.
Maybe we didn't see what we all believe we saw. Right?
Yeah. Well, it only takes one. How many times have we talked about people watching a video and coming to a very different conclusion? We're all watching the same video, but you have that one person or 2 or 3 people here that said, oh no, maybe it's something else. Maybe it's different. And, as we stated, I think that the prosecution, we talked about this in week 1, in week 2, I think the prosecution themselves did a great job putting on witnesses that talked about the incident itself, the character of George Floyd, his life challenges with drugs and addiction, which I think now that the world understands because of, unfortunately, the current opioid epidemic. Keep in mind, we've had a heroin and opioid epidemic before.
Right. And crack and the whole thing. But the difference was there was this lack of humanization in those other cases. And I agree with you that the prosecution did an excellent job of humanizing Mr. Floyd, humanizing the people who were there and experienced this devastation, this dehumanizing experience, and how they were emotionally affected by it. And I think they did an excellent job of that. And then the defense comes back, last week, interestingly enough, as we thought, Derek Chauvin on Thursday said that he was going to, plead his Fifth Amendment rights,
Right.
not incriminate himself. So he didn't go on the stand, and we expected that. And I guess, again, as a reporter who's covered trials, you as an attorney, you would agree. It was not in his best interest to go and sit on that witness stand. He would have.
Will, I will say this: after the testimony of the people that were there, and his exchange with the elderly gentleman on the sidewalk, and the testimony of that young 9-10-year-old girl that was there.
Right. Oh, yes.
I thought that he probably had to really consider getting on that stand so that they could see his humanization. Yeah, all they're seeing.
So you might have if you were his attorney, you may have put him up there.
I would have highly considered it. I'm not saying I would have. After the evidence that went forth and the experts that they put up to testify, which I think were very questionable. Right. As a matter of fact, the ME that said that it was the exhaust that killed him or contributed to his death or could have. On cross-examination, he said, yeah, it could have. What ended up happening is that particular person now, of course, once you get the AP involved in investigative journalism, he's involved in a case now in Maryland.
Yeah, he's got a lawsuit against him,
in federal court.
Yeah.
So that's saying that he withheld information and becomes more favorable, of course, to the police officers. But
the key is, though, even in that, the key is will the jury be allowed to hear that? Because again, as you know, that's what's really key here is that these jurors are now going to be, looking at the facts of the case. They're not hearing sort of these other nuanced things that we're hearing out here in the public. And there are certain parameters and things that they are privy to that we're not exactly privy to, that they can sit and really look at the evidence and look at it. And then they have to basically make their decision through the very clear, hopefully clear, but limited instructions coming from the judge, know. So here we are, the jury of public opinion, looking at video, hearing the commentary, feeling the emotion, but they are actually there and they have a very different vantage point. And so,
Will, for me, I can say, and that's a very good point. I can say I watched about 75% of the trial in real time. There were a day I just had to take a break from a lot of the emotional testimony.
Yeah.
But
same here.
But I actually, and then again, we could talk about race fatigue at another time, and these incidents that we see keep coming over and over and over again. Right. But I think that the judge, the city, the prosecution, I think everybody understands the weight of this decision that's getting ready to come from the jury. Because this decision, if it's deemed the wrong decision, right? Whatever that decision is, if it's deemed the wrong decision, it could have reverberating effects, not just now, not just in the streets, not just across the country, but for years to come. Because that means that you've got another officer with clear and convincing evidence that he murdered somebody in broad daylight, clear and convincing. And that's a very high standard. But I'm using that high standard because that's exactly what it is. That if he does not become held accountable for this murder, so you got Rodney King, you got the officers in Eric Garner, you got the private citizen in Trayvon Martin, you've got the officer in Castile case, who's back on the force in Minneapolis as well.
Right.
All these individuals we've seen go to trial or go towards some disciplinary action, and they're back on the job. Nothing happened to them. So that becomes an issue. And if that happens, that gives I believe, that gives a false security to police officers saying that we can continue doing what we're doing. In those instances, which I don't think, again, nobody thinks what Derek Chauvin did was smart, was in line with any policy and procedure, which the commander, the training officer, the captain, everybody said the exact same thing. This is not part of our procedure. And I think that dings it. quite a bit, because now we talked about the blue wall, Will. The blue wall, is it cracking, or did they just open the door to let a bad apple roll out and they're going to close it shut? And I think it's the latter.
But the only challenge there is that all of that kind of perspective about the possibilities, the negative possibilities that may erupt, again, the jury is not privy to that energy right now. Remember in the Trayvon Martin case, where after the eruption, you started hearing from jurors, and jurors were like, whoa, wait a minute. You was hearing comments like, hey, we didn't know. And again, if you've had time, if you've been on a jury, you know that they haven't been reading papers. They haven't been checking out CNN. They haven't been on social media. So they're very much locked in to the limited environment of this case. You know, after the verdict, NAACP put out a statement, said, what we've all witnessed throughout the trial thus far confirmed what we saw in the video. Derek Chauvin murdered George Floyd. As we turn to closing arguments on Monday, the nation waits on justice. Well, guess what? The jury is not. The jury's not reading that. The jury's not reading that. The jury's not reading. Well, he murdered. No, they're not. The jury is going to get very clear instructions about what does murder really entail. They're going to get real clear instructions, and they're going to have real clear parameters that they can't go past. And essentially, as you said at the opening, it only takes one to say, wait a minute, based on the instructions, based on the evidence, I convict in good conscience. And it may, you know, it may really be someone who's honestly looking at this in an objective way. It could easily be you or I, who if we were put in that kind of situation where we were limited like that we might make the same type of judgment. Absolutely. It's not likely. It's not likely, right, but it is very, very possible.
Well, Will, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. You know, the juries, or the jurors are not reading what we're reading. They're not listening to what we're listening to. They're not seeing what we're seeing. Jurors are sequestered, you know, and I talk about when I learned how to pick jurors, or what's called voir dire. You know, and in my very first job as a legislative assistant, which is known as chief of staff or an elected official, the jury, where we used to go get our bacon sandwich, you know, at the top of the governmental building, that's where we sequestered the jurors. So I got a chance while I was waiting on my sandwich to really look and see who serves on the jury, right? And to understand body language and the people that were grouped together, people that kind of stayed to themselves, people who felt like they were and you could tell who were the leaders of the jury pool, right? So when you after years of studying that and then actually participating in voir dire, you know, you now look at and see where you never, ever, ever say this is guaranteed. No trial is guaranteed. I've seen some go where we thought it was going to go to the other side. I've seen motions been decided one way, where everybody thought that it was going to be decided an opposite way. You've seen individuals become, you know, the lead juror or the defector, as we would call it, and you never thought that would happen. So I'm cautioning everybody. You know, we know what we saw, but remember Rodney King.
Hey man, I tell you, one of my favorite movies, classic, 12 Angry Men, which is about, you know, jurors.
Jimmy Stewart.
12, yes. Yeah. You know, James Fonda. Fonda was in that. That's James Fonda. Yeah. And it was about, you know, 12 men deciding the fate of a young man in a homicide or murder case, right? Yeah. And you see how people come to a situation. There's the facts, yes. There's the limitations in the instructions from the judge, yes. But people come to a situation through their own individual lenses, you know, and their own individual life experiences. And you see in that case how, you know, certain jurors were ready to just convict a young man. And a lot of it was rooted in their own relationships, their own dysfunctional situations with their sons or whatever the case is.
Yeah.
And again, it gave you some insight as to it. In that case, it took one person who was like, no, wait a minute. We got to look at the facts. And he stayed in there until they finally went around and everybody really started confronting their true inner selves and how they were really dealing honestly with this case. Well, you just don't know. You just don't know whether it could go that way or whether it could go, another way. One of the things that happened in the case that came out was, and we mentioned it sort of at the top about this issue of carbon monoxide being in his, whether it was in his blood or not, because the medical examiner said something about he could have died from carbon monoxide poisoning. And then what happened was the judge wouldn't allow, the prosecution could have had that testing done earlier and included, but didn't, and then tried to maybe, since it was raised, bring it in to the case, but the judge wouldn't allow it. Do you think, from an attorney standpoint, do you think they made a mistake there of not?
Well, yeah, again, as a defense, you're just trying to find a hole.
Yeah.
But you don't have to prove the case. You're just trying to find one hole. And I think the defense was able to find one hole. Now, there was a point where they talked about, they brought up the witness and talked about the amount of carbon monoxide that we all have in our system, or CO2, and at one time. And he said at that time, based upon the blood they drew, it was 2%, 0.2 or something like that. And all of us are between 0 and 0.3 or 0 and 3%. And, I think the prosecution did a good job on the cross. But to your point, the defense was, I believe they found that hole.
Right.
Could it have been this? I think the drug and the heart condition issue. Of course, all of us have some form of heart, degenerative heart issue, as they say, the heart disease. At some point, we all our hearts get weaker. We all get older. But was that the main contributing factor to his death? So again, they were just trying to find that hole, And real quick, I pride myself on classic movies. So when it was Fonda and Matt Stewart, but during that time period, they were both competing in those great movies. But my wife and I, we were watching 12 Angry Men not too long ago, and how Fonda was able to, his character was able to just raise doubt, and you could tell like the cinematic points in the movie where it was raining hard.
Yeah, man, it was
down.
Classic.
And then all of a sudden, after they decide and the rain stops, they go outside and they go one at a time. I mean, man, look, it was one of the best movies ever made, especially legal movies. And I just don't think you have people like that anymore that's able to take that lead and change people's mind, because you have to be a certain type of personality, right? In that jury room to face another person, especially when you got 11 against you. Many people don't like controversy. And many people rather go with the crowd than be the pariah. They would rather do that. So will we have a Fonda in that jury room? I'm not sure. I don't know, because we didn't see the jurors in the trial. We weren't there during voir dire. We don't know their names. We have no idea what their background is. We just know their gender and ethnicity, right?
Well, one of the things, to continue on the 12 Angry Men theme is that they were all white, and they were deciding the fate of a Hispanic kid, and that was an aspect there of it. In this case, we know the racial overtones is all over this, and the jury is, there's 9 women, 5 men. 29% of them are Black, 14% mixed race, 57% white. And so at least in this sense, we've got a close representation, I think, of the community. I don't know exactly what the breakdown of the community of Minneapolis is, but when you talk about just balance of men and women,
Yeah.
And you talk about, having a
It's a good
significant
balance.
percentage of Black people on that jury. I think from that standpoint, I think we're in good standing.
Yeah.
But again, as you said, it takes people who have a sense of bravery and conviction and are not just sitting there saying to themselves, I really want to get home, be done with this, because it's not easy being on a jury. I haven't personally been on one. As a reporter, I've covered trials and I've seen a jury having to be in action, and I've seen the court in action. And as we were saying earlier about us being traumatized by the trial and having to see the video over and over, imagine them must be traumatized by the
Absolutely.
details that they're seeing. I mean, they've seen the autopsy pictures.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They're seeing a lot more detail and a lot more information to be traumatized over. So I want to believe that because many of them were exposed to Rodney King, Trayvon Martin, they did see the uprising that occurred, Freddie Gray, all of these other individuals that we've been talking about, that they do have a strong sense of the gravity of the moment, and that they're taking this, this duty, this civic duty as Americans very seriously. And I pray for them as well, because again, I know that I've been traumatized. I know a lot of people have been traumatized. We're in the middle of a pandemic that already has us in traumatization, if that's a word, mode.
Oh, yeah.
So to be sequestered, and inundated with this kind of information, it's got to be no small task. So my prayers go out to them and their families, as well.
The judge told him, he said, pack a long bag. It's going to be a long week or so. And he was telling them, you guys basically, he didn't say you got to get it right, but, pack a good bag, because you're going to be sequestered and for this deliberation. But you're right. I mean, imagine being not just in a courtroom, but also in a multi-day trial at that, in this emotional trial. And it's a murder trial, right? And then being away from your family in COVID. They've got masks on in that courtroom the whole time. And we all wear masks. They're not the most comfortable masks, things to have on your face, but everybody has masks on. Right. And not only that, but you're in an environment with not just 11 other people, but multiple different people, up to about 20 maybe, if you include the judge and the bailiff and the court reporters, the stenographer, and the prosecution, their team, and the defense and their team.
Right.
Right? I mean, so you're putting yourself at risk with people you don't know, because we don't know. I'm not sure about the COVID testing, but you are. We are traumatized. We still are. Things are opening up, but we are. So all that goes into your psyche, and then you're away from your family.
That's right.
During this whole time, you're able to have very short conversations if you have children or family members. If you're used to sleeping in your own bed, you're not sleeping in your own bed.
That's right. That's another element, man. They haven't even been talking to each other. No, they haven't had an opportunity they haven't been talking to each other. It's like now is the first opportunity they're actually going to have to really engage each other. So all of them have not been, we think we've been isolated by the pandemic. They've been isolated on top of isolation. They've been
in their room by themselves, with a TV, probably no telephones in there.
Yeah. So Chauvin, what's at stake? So Chauvin is charged with second-degree murder, third-degree murder, and second-degree manslaughter. If convicted of the most serious charge, he could face 10.5 to 15 years in prison under sentencing guidelines. And he also could receive, a lesser term. So the jurors must decide whether or not the government proved all the elements, and the defense bears no burden of proof at all. And Chauvin is deemed innocent unless convicted. That's so you've been pretty good at predicting outcomes. What's your gut tell you about how this case is going to
Well, I'll
end up.
say this. You said what's at stake, right? First of all, 10 to 15 years for that, that's not a lot of time, right? That's first and foremost, especially with us coming out of the crack epidemic time where people were getting 40 years for 3 rocks of cocaine. Come on. This man lost his life. It wasn't his fault at all. He was begging for help, said he was being compliant. We saw he was compliant. Even other officers even suggested maybe we should let him up. And keep in mind, also just looking ahead, the other officers' attorneys are watching this trial too, because they're saying, because they were contributing to his death.
That's right.
What they're saying is, don't plead guilty, because if Chauvin gets off, then you got a great chance of getting off as well.
Yeah.
Because if he wasn't a direct reason for his death, contributory factor, then you were not a contributory factor to his death. So you have not just the Chauvin verdict, but you have the 3 coming behind it, right?
Right.
Now, the other thing is, with this particular trial, if he is convicted of the highest crime, right, then of course you get an automatic. I can't believe they're going to let him out. They're going to still remand him. He's going to be in custody. They're going to go through sentencing, probably pending his appeal. So he's going to appeal it, right?
He's going to appeal.
Yeah, he's going to appeal it. Just like in the case where the white female officer shot Botha in Dallas, right? She was very remorseful and so forth. Brother got on the stand saying, I believe my brother would forgive you. Right. I believe his brother would rather be alive. Right. But of course, we can't speak for the dead one way or the other. But she appealed her verdict, even though she was remorseful, for what took place. So, we see where officers can be convicted of the lesser crime. And I think if there is a conviction, I would be highly surprised if they do not convict him. I would be highly surprised if they do not. So I believe there will be a conviction. The question becomes on which actual charge will he be convicted of. If anything, he'll definitely be convicted of the manslaughter. But my gut tells me that there will be a conviction on the higher. But at the same time, 10 to 15 years is not a lot of time for this particular murder.
Yeah, I think I agree that conviction is going to happen. I think that it is going to be the lesser charge, because this is something that just tells me that when the jury is confronted with the instructions from the judge and the jury is looking at evidence that we're not looking at. Again, you said something earlier about having different vantage points to the same information, right? The jury has got all of the different video vantage points to look at and can syncing up in real time and all of that. We're only seeing certain vantage points. We're only seeing it through either our cell phones or TV screens. They're able to see this information in a very different way than most of us. And Absolutely. I think that once they get access to that information and they have to go by the letter of the law as instructed by the judge, I think that they're probably going to end up with the lesser charge. And then you're going to have you're going to have as you said, you're going to have the appeal. You're going to have those things, but there's going to be a lesser charge. If there's no conviction, I would, as unsurprised as I have been by things that have happened over the course of my life and seeing these things, I would still be surprised by that if there was none at all, because this was just so egregious.
It was.
But I think to say that he planned it out, which in my understanding of where murder really separates and becomes murder, is that there has to be some level of premeditation and planning it out. And that's why I think he's going to get the lesser charge.
Right.
What do you think? Well, I mean, what do you think people should do? in terms of this case and even in preparing for the decision? What do you think?
So at first, I think that people should, again, sit back, let the process work itself out. But whatever happens, Will, I think we're going to be traumatized again. Mm-hmm. It is going to, if it's like you said, both of us are very, we're not optimistic that it's going to be the higher crime. I think it should be. I think it could be, but we're not optimistic that it will. So there will be some letdown there if it's not. If it's the lesser charge, people say, okay, but look at how much it took to get a lesser charge of manslaughter, right? So I think you're also going to have some issues there. If there's a non-conviction, I think that we're looking at unrest within our cities for a very lengthy time. Yeah. I just cannot fathom. I cannot fathom seeing a non-guilty verdict and how it plays out, especially it's summertime again, right? It's spring, but
yeah.
So now we come up on the anniversary of the actual murder.
It was Memorial Day. 2020.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. We come up on the anniversary of that, and if it's a non-guilty verdict, we're traumatized again. But ultimately, whatever happens, we got to have a conversation about this across the country. We got to. Police departments have to stop, time out, mayors, social justice groups, time out. We got to come together and we got to find a solution to this, period.
Well, I'll be praying for the jury, praying for our nation, praying for our people. And this is a time to be praying, man. Praying for the best, man.
Absolutely. Well, again, this is something that we're covering. We're going to cover to the end and even after. We've been covering the justice for George Floyd from the very beginning and talking about issues not just around the trial, but even within our communities and how this thing will play out afterwards. So thank you for joining us for this episode. If you want to follow us, please follow us on Facebook, our social media, like, share, give us your comments as well. And until then, that's the way we see it, and that's the way it is. We'll see you next time.